Somebody wants your silver, and the cheapest way to get it is to make you hand it over scared. If you have been stacking silver through this run and the violent dips lately have your finger hovering over the sell button, I need you to hear me before you do anything, because what is happening to you right now has a name, it has a playbook, and it has a long, well documented history of transferring metal from frightened hands into patient ones. It is called a shakeout, and my answer to the question in the title is simple, and I will spend the rest of this video proving it. Do not sell. A shakeout is not a verdict on the metal. It is forced and frightened selling clustered around a scary moment. And the clearest proof I know comes from the worst financial panic of our lifetimes, when gold itself, the oldest money on earth, got dumped hard in the middle of the crisis. Not because anything was wrong with gold, but because gold was one of the few things anybody could still sell. And then it recovered and led almost everything else higher. Hold that thought, because that one episode explains everything you are feeling right now. And later I will show you the one stretch of history where a shakeout fooled almost everyone in the middle of a raging bull market, including people who had the whole story right. I think of one man every time this happens, a retired tow truck operator out of Amarillo, Texas. He spent the better part of 3 decades winching wrecks off Interstate 40 at 3 in the morning in wind that comes across the panhandle like it has a grudge. And that job taught him something most people never learn. He could walk around a car in a ditch, crumpled hood, glass everywhere, the owner in tears on the shoulder, and tell you in about a minute whether it was truly totaled or whether the frame was straight and everything else was just sheet metal. Ugly and broken are two different things. Half his job was hauling in cars that looked destroyed and drove out of the shop 2 weeks later. When he retired, he took a piece of what he had saved and started stacking silver, tubes of American Eagles in a gun safe bolted to the concrete in his garage. And through this run, as silver finally punched through the ceiling that had capped it for half a century and pushed up into the mid-60s, leading the whole metals complex higher, he has watched the same thing you have. Sharp, sickening air pockets on the way up. Days when the screen is a wall of red and every headline says the party is over. That is the moment I want to talk about, because that is the moment when a stacker either understands what he owns or gets separated from it. Start with who actually sells during a shakeout, because in my years in the gold and silver world, this is the piece that changed how I see every scary day. The heavy selling in those moments does not come from people who sat down, studied the supply picture, and calmly concluded silver's story is over. It comes from people who have no choice. Leveraged traders getting margin calls, funds facing redemptions who must raise cash by the close, desks trimming risk because a model told them to. And when you are forced to sell, you do not sell what you want to sell. You sell whatever still has a bid, which means the strongest, most liquid assets get hit first and hardest, precisely because they are strong. Quality gets sold in a panic for the same reason the best horse gets ridden hardest. That is exactly what happened in 2008, and it is worth slowing down on because it is the cleanest laboratory experiment the markets ever ran on this question. In the autumn of that crisis, with banks failing and credit frozen solid, gold got sold hard. The metal that was supposed to be the shelter fell along with nearly everything else at the very worst of the storm. The financial channels ran their obituaries. Safe haven fails, they said. And retirees who owned gold for exactly this kind of moment looked at their screens, felt their stomachs drop, and concluded they had been wrong about everything. But look at why it fell. Hedge funds and institutions were drowning in margin calls, and their junk had no buyers. Their mortgage paper, their exotic positions, all of it was frozen. Gold was one of the only doors that still opened, so they shoved everything they could through that door. Gold was sold because it was good, because it was liquid, because it could be turned into cash on a day when almost nothing else could. That is a compliment wearing a disguise. And here is the ending the obituaries never got around to reporting. Gold turned back up before the stock market did, recovered everything, and then over the following few years, roughly doubled again. The people who sold into that shakeout, who treated forced selling as a verdict, missed the single longest leg of that entire bull market. The people who understood the difference held on, and some of them quietly bought what the forced sellers were coughing up. Now, watch who benefits when you get this wrong, because this is the spine of the whole story. The trading desks at the big banks do not make their money when you buy metal and sit on it for 10 years. They make it on churn, on the round trip, on you selling scared and buying back late. The financial media does not hold your metal and does not attend your retirement. It sells your attention, and fear is the cheapest attention there is. So every dip gets narrated like a funeral. Nobody on those channels gets paid to tell a retiree in Amarillo that forced selling around a scary moment tells you nothing about the metal in his safe. That silence is worth remembering because it repeats at every single dip. And silver takes this whole dynamic and turns the volume up. The silver market is small compared to gold, a fraction of the size. So the same wave of forced selling that nudges gold can toss silver around violently. That is the price of owning the metal with the most explosive upside. The shakeouts feel like the end of the world every single time. Keep the actual picture in front of you. Both metals have been running in this stretch. Silver broke above a ceiling that held for roughly half a century, a lid that had turned back every rally since the days of disco, and has been the leader of this move. Gold just put together one of its strongest stretches in months, back up through the low 4300s, though still below the record it set earlier in this cycle. That is what the tape actually says. Neither metal is falling apart. What you are living through is turbulence inside an uptrend, and turbulence is where shakeouts do their harvesting. If you want proof that a shakeout needs no fundamental reason at all, look at silver in 2011. Silver had run enormously, and then the exchange raised margin requirements on silver futures again and again in quick succession, jacking up the cash traders had to post to hold their positions. Leveraged players were forced out all at once, and silver lost roughly a third of its value in a matter of days. Now ask the only question that matters. Did any silver leave the ground faster? Did industry stop needing it? Nothing about the metal changed. A rule change forced leveraged hands to sell, and the cascade fed on itself. 2 years later, a Federal Reserve chairman merely hinted that the easy money era might slow, just a hint in testimony, and gold fell off a cliff, a drop that landed close to what turned out to be a major long-term low. By 2015, the last exhausted holders finally gave up in one final capitulation, and from that point, the market began the long climb that eventually carried gold to records. Every one of those moments was reported as an ending. Every one of them was a scary moment, forcing weak and leveraged hands out, while the metal's actual story never blinked. But here is the part almost nobody gets to, the part that tells you who is standing on the other side of your sell order. The futures market publishes positioning reports, and they show the same pattern at every washout. The fast money, the trend-chasing funds, pile in near the highs and puke near the lows because they chase headlines. Meanwhile, the commercial players, the ones closest to the physical metal, do their accumulating into exactly the weakness that terrifies everyone else. When a shaken stacker sells his tubes into a dip, that metal does not vanish. It moves to somebody who is waiting for him to give up. A shakeout, at bottom, is a wealth transfer, dressed up as a market event. The question the title of this video is really asking is which side of that transfer you intend to be on. And the biggest buyers on the planet have already answered it for themselves. Central banks have been buying gold at a pace with no modern precedent, year after year, and the buying accelerated after they all watched a major nation's reserves get frozen by decree and realized that somebody else's promise can be switched off, but a bar in your own vault cannot. That buying has gone so far that gold has now overtaken the euro to become the second largest reserve asset held by the world's central banks. Sit with that. The institutions that print the money rank gold above the second most important currency on Earth. So when they watch a dip, they see a discount. And when a retiree watches the same dip, he is told to see a disaster. If you would rather act like the first group, this is exactly what the free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide was made for. It is written for American retirees with $100,000 or more in a retirement account, and it walks through how folks diversify a portion of that into physical gold and silver inside the account they already have, without taxes or penalties, using a self-directed precious metals IRA. This is not just for insiders. $100,000 or more in any retirement account is enough to do what the big institutions are doing. It comes from our family to yours, no obligation, nothing to buy. If you are watching this on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. Request it, read it, and then come back because you still need to hear about the stockpile. Because there is a supply story underneath silver that a shakeout cannot touch, and it starts with something most Americans have never heard, The United States once held a strategic stockpile of silver measured in billions of ounces. Silver was a war material. During the Second World War, the Manhattan Project itself borrowed enormous quantities of treasury silver to wind the magnet coils for its enrichment machines because copper was too scarce. That mountain of metal is essentially gone, drawn down and sold off over the decades, never rebuilt. There is no national silver cushion waiting to flood the market. Set that against how silver actually behaves in the modern economy. Gold gets saved, silver gets used and scattered. It rides away inside electronics and solar panels and medical equipment in quantities too small to ever recover, which means industrial demand consumes it permanently. The world has been running a structural deficit in silver for years on end, demand outstripping fresh supply, with the gap filled by draining above-ground inventories. Most new silver does not even come from silver mines. It comes out of the ground as a byproduct of mining copper, zinc, and lead, which means a higher silver price cannot simply summon more of it. The deliverable metal sitting in the exchange warehouses and the London vaults has been drawn down, and much of what remains is already spoken for, while the paper claims trading against that metal outnumber the ounces many times over. Now hold a shakeout up against all of that. A wave of forced selling in the futures market changes none of it. Not the deficit, not the byproduct problem, not the empty stockpile. The ditch does not bend the frame. Now, let me be straight with you, because you deserve the caution as much as the case. Shakeouts inside real bull markets can run deeper and longer than anyone expects, and I promise to show you the stretch of history that proves it. In the great gold bull of the 1970s, gold ran from around $35 an ounce to well over $150. And then, right in the middle of the bull, it got nearly cut in half, grinding all the way back down to around 100 by 1976. That was not a few bad weeks. That was a shakeout that lasted years, and it convinced enormous numbers of people who had been completely right about the big picture to walk away. From that miserable low, gold rose roughly eightfold into the 1980 peak. The largest gains of the entire decade went to the people who survived the shakeout and were forfeited by the people who were right too early and quit. So I will not stand here and tell you the current turbulence resolves soon or resolves gently. I do not know the day, I do not know the depth, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. What I am giving you is a case built on mechanism and history, not a guarantee, and not personal financial advice. That honest uncertainty is exactly why the practical question becomes whether a shakeout can force your hand when it arrives. My Amarillo friend put it better than any strategist I ever read. In 30 years of towing, he never once bought a wrecked car off a crying owner at the side of the road, because he knew the shoulder of a highway at 3 in the morning is the single worst place on earth to judge what something is worth. Same principle, 3 rules. Size the position so that no dip, however ugly, ever forces you to sell to pay a bill. Metal you might need soon is metal a shakeout can take from you. Own the actual metal, not a paper promise that behaves like the leveraged traders who get flushed at every margin call. And make your rules on a calm day written down so that when the scary moment comes, you are executing a plan instead of absorbing a panic. The stackers who get shaken out are almost never the ones who own too much silver. They are the ones who owned it with borrowed conviction. There is one more thing my friend understood from all those years on the night shift, and it is the part one most want you to take with you. He never got called to the easy scenes. By the time an ordinary driver saw the flares and the backed-up traffic, his work was already done and he was gone. The metals market runs on the same clock. The central banks did their buying quietly, before the crowd, through years when the financial press called gold a relic. The big institutional portfolios, the pension money, the television advisors, they still hold almost no gold at all, a historical sliver of their assets. And Wall Street banks have only lately begun publishing the kind of aggressive gold forecasts they would have laughed at a few years ago. That is the sequence. The informed money positions in the quiet, the crowd arrives at the noise, and the people who waited for the story to feel safe end up buying from the people who did not. A shakeout is the quiet part. It is the stretch of road before the flares go up, when holding feels lonely and selling feels sensible, and it is precisely the stretch where the patient side of the transfer gets built. And when I say what you build, I mean more than a number on a statement. The silver in that Amarillo gun safe is headed, in the end, to a granddaughter in Lubbock, and he will tell you that himself, so that what 30 years of night shifts earned does not quietly leak away in a currency that buys less every decade. If that is how you think about what you have built, get the free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide and read it with your family, because this decision is about them as much as you. It shows how retirees with $100,000 or more in a 401k or IRA diversify a portion into physical gold and silver inside the account they already have, without taxes or penalties. So what you pass on is something your children and grandchildren can hold in their hands. And if you have watched this whole video, mention that when you reach out, and you will also get access to a free one-on-one educational web conference for viewers with $100,000 or more, a real conversation, from our family to yours, no obligation, nothing to buy. The honest reason to do it now is simple. The time to decide how you handle a shakeout is before you are standing in one, while the choice is still calm and still cheap. If you are watching this on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. So, one last time, back to the ditch. The car is crumpled, the glass is everywhere, the crowd on the shoulder is sure it is totaled, and the one man who has seen 1,000 of these walks around it slowly with a flashlight and says the only sentence that matters: the frame is straight. That is your silver in this shakeout. The panic is sheet metal. The deficit, the empty stockpile, the central banks ranking gold above the euro, the paper claims stacked over real ounces, that is the frame, and nothing about the scary moment has bent it. Do not sign your metal over to the crowd on the shoulder. The frame is straight. Drive it home.